I'm excited for everyone listening. I'm gonna introduce you. Well, actually, I'll have Rebecca introduce herself. She's known as the 20 word pro.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Okamoto. I'm a communication and personal branding consultant. I help people introduce, market, and promote themselves in 20 words or less.
Awesome. Very concise. I love it.
Thanks.
So we were connected through William, who we knew each other back at Trinet. I know that he was on the West Coast, so he was making waves on the West Coast when I was doing that on the East Coast. So that's how we connected. But I'm so glad that he connected us. I talk about you actually all the time.
Well, it was really amazing because he and I made a connection on some sort of like networking event that was virtual. Then we talked, and then right after that, he flagged you on something on LinkedIn and said, "You got to meet this guy." So he did a great job connecting us.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about LinkedIn. I've connected with a lot of random people. That's how I got to LinkedIn. I would just reach out to all the Asians at LinkedIn and ask them to help me out. And that's how I got here, actually.
Yeah, what a great way of doing it. Yeah, I think LinkedIn has gone from it's just a digital resume holding place to like the premier way to market, promote, meet
Hmm.
people. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I saw that you have one post that like literally went viral, like was the definition of viral. What was that like? Like just seeing all the feedback and man, that must have been awesome.
I was really shocked. So that one was 5 ways to introduce yourself perfectly in 20 words or less. And people are still looking at it in comments. And I was really shocked because I posted it kind of like randomly. And then I kept getting all these notifications from LinkedIn, had to turn the notifications off. But it made a huge difference. And I went from, I kid you not, like an email list of two, my dad, who would print my blog
Uh-huh.
and mail it, snail mail it to his friends to say, read my daughter's blog. And like my nephew who was like helping me with my blog. And my email list blew up to like 9,000 people within a couple of months.
That, I mean, that's the power of having a concise message, right? Because I was reading it, I was like, oh, like you can easily digest this so simply. And I think the takeaway is to have something where people can read it in a matter, because like you said, people's attention span now is horrible. I mean, you look at things like TikTok and Instagram, and it's like if you have it's at less than 5 seconds, people will scroll to the next one, you know?
Right. In fact, one study out of like, I think it was like the University of Scotland said that just by the way you say the word hello, people are judging you on your credibility and trustworthiness. And men and women have to say it differently, just the word hello. So women have to sound more authoritative, have to say like hello. See, like the intonation goes down.
Yeah.
But men have to sound more friendly. They have to say like hello. And their intonation has to kind of go up. So it's on NPR. You had me at hello. It's a fascinating read. And then they have an audio clip you can listen to, and you can hear the difference of trustworthiness. And that's just with one word.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm obsessed with how somehow Steve Jobs managed to get us to buy iPods by saying 1,000 tunes in your pocket and creating something so amazing with just the few number of words. So I'm obsessed with clarity and conciseness.
Yeah, I think especially now in the world of social media, I think it's made it, I think every year, every generation gets less and more distracted, right? As technology takes over our lives and you get pinged every 5 seconds. So,
Yeah, I just tell people you have a better chance of engaging with a goldfish. So if you think about trying to say something to a goldfish, they'll have a 9 second attention span. That's how long you have to get, you have 8 seconds for an adult or less to capture their attention. So I'm like, how do you walk in and own the room immediately so that someone says, tell me more, or let's schedule more time.
mm, yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I think we're not really taught these things, like even going to school and college, like
Correct.
these things
Yeah.
are talked about, but it's so much more valuable, right? I mean,
Well, they teach people teach us they give us formats. Like Procter and Gamble was the art of the one-page memo, and they told you like follow the template, but they didn't really tell you why it mattered or how to use it. So you would get really new people and they would use like size 5 font and then no margins. And they're like, well, I got it to one page. You're like, yeah, that's not what I meant. And so we're taught to be format followers, but we're really not taught how to anticipate what someone wants and how to nail that. And what I've learned now is you can actually teach it. So I spent all my corporate career puzzling about how do I know what they want to actually figuring out, oh, that's how you figure out what they want. So that's how you capture attention in like 20 words.
Yeah, one of the most successful guys at LinkedIn, Adrian, that's it. I asked him like, what's the one thing you learned from working with the top 20 accounts, like LinkedIn's biggest 20 accounts? He said, speak in headlines. He said,
Correct.
he said, if you have a proposal that's like 15 pages, trim it down to 3 pages. Like no one's going to read the whole thing. He's like, the better you can get at trimming things down, the more successful you'll be, the higher you go up.
Yes, that's exactly right. I mean, when I work with job hunters, and they'll call me and say, I introduced myself like at a networking event with like 20, 30 people, and I got pulled aside and offered an interview or a job after a 20-word introduction with 30 other people or 20 other people, because their introduction stood out and it's 20 words. And I don't know. I'm an engineer. I'm a mechanical engineer. And I used to think that, like if 20 words is great, 20 bullet points is better, 20 minutes is better, 20 slides is better.
Hmm.
And I've learned that 20 words or less is perfect.
Yeah, it's cool because it's proven, right? And I
Right.
think nowadays there's just so much that I mean, every executive, like you're getting emails every 5 seconds, right? So, they just want, okay, like what's the essence of what you're trying to say?
Right. And I will say I'm really focused now on strategic communication. So helping really top talent, high potential managers break through to the executive level. And what they don't realize is, I mean, the people at the executive level got there because they're super smart. So they only need 20 words to decide, do I need to learn more or is that all that I need to hear? Right. And they're making decisions. They're making snap decisions with a 5-minute pitch, they're going with their gut because they're super smart. So they only need headlines. And when they want more, they'll ask you for it.
Right, right. Hmm. Yeah, and just so the listeners know, so you were also the youngest, was it Asian executive or youngest
I
Asian?
was the first Asian American woman to hit what P&G's like top 1%. So they had a different band structure level. So the titling is not standard, but it was essentially the top 1%. Yeah. So I wasn't necessarily, well, since I was the first, I was at that point, I'll say the youngest, but yeah, I was very ambitious at one point in my career. And I decided I want to be the first Asian woman at this level, but another woman who was in Asia got there before me, a friend of mine actually. And then I said, well, I want to be the first Asian American woman. And I was, unfortunately though, for 12 years, the only one at that level. After I left P&G, they didn't promote another person for 2 more years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it, it's interesting. I think in so many ways, like we've come a long way, right? But this year is like a perfect example of how we have so much more to go, right? In terms of equality, unconscious bias. I mean, a lot of times we don't even recognize we're doing it.
Agreed. The one that fascinates me is the part where they've shown studies where they'll have a white woman lecturer, like a picture of her, to students, and then they'll swap in a picture of a Asian woman, and then the same white woman lecturing, and people hear an accent when they see the Asian professor's face.
Hmm.
And that's unconscious bias. And so as soon as they think, well, she's got an accent, she doesn't know English or whatever comes to their mind, and it's completely unconscious. And I mean, I got that my entire life, and I grew up in Detroit, Michigan.
Yeah,
My Japanese is terrible. My Japanese has an accent. My American English is fine.
yeah, it's the worst. And even in 2021, people are like, "Wow, your English is really good." It's like, ugh, it's like,
Yeah.
I'm really like in this age.
In this age, yeah. Yeah. I was in Japan and then some guy from New York City came and he's like, "Why is your English so good?" I'm like, "Dude, I'm American." Like, why are you so ignorant? Please, this is embarrassing.
Yeah, yeah, but your last name is like very clearly Japanese.
Japanese, yeah.
Probably why people just assume.
Well, obviously, and then my grandparents immigrated, all of my grandparents. So I mean, ethnically, I'm 100% Japanese. So I look Asian, look Japanese, but I was raised, yeah, in the Midwest.
Ooh, and that must be tough in the Midwest too, right? Because from what I hear, there's even less diversity over, right? Or is Detroit pretty diverse?
Well, when I grew up, it was black and white, and there was a lot of black-white racial tension, and there were very few Asians. When we moved across the state to a smaller town, and there were like no other Asians except for a couple refugees from Vietnam, like two other. So I spent my entire, call it youth, without knowing any other Asians other than my family members.
Hmm. Yeah, and even I feel like in Japanese even has a smaller percentage, right? Like I'm Vietnamese, so I meet tons of Vietnamese people, but I don't think I've met I think I only know one or two other Japanese people. It's extremely rare.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, it's like in Japantown or Little Tokyo in LA, that's I see lots of Japanese. I'll see them in San Jose, out here. But yeah, it's not. Yeah, seeing an Asian face was great, let alone a Japanese face.
Yeah.
I found it. I found it really interesting because I wasn't used to the bias or the discrimination because I was the only one, and I couldn't tell. I couldn't tell why.
You weren't sure like what it was exactly. You just knew that
There was something. Yeah, yeah.
huh.
I'll tell you though, I lived in when I moved to Japan, and I lived there 4 or 5 years. And what I noticed was, so in Japan, because I'm clearly Japanese, I got great service, and then my white friends didn't.
Ah.
And then apparently my face is very moldable. Because if I went to Korea, people thought I was Korean. If I went to Singapore, Indonesia, people thought I was like Indo-Chinese. So I blended really well. And I started to realize the privilege of what it looks like to blend. And I could see that I was getting less discrimination, even though technically I did not speak the language or understand the culture. I was better accepted just by the way I looked. And then I would go back to the US and I could feel the racism because I could see I wasn't getting the same level of great treatment because of the way I looked. And I'm like, I didn't know how much racism there was. I'm, unconscious until I was part of a majority and was completely accepted by the way I looked.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So it sounds like you were a chameleon at one point, right? Because you had to be like when you were much younger, and that skill like allowed you to, or did you say like, would you say you were a chameleon to a certain extent, like just in the beginning of your career?
And my beginning of my career, I was not. I was very Asian American. I was super timid, worse, worse than just humble, but like really timid. And I didn't know how to speak up. And I would have been a classic. I thought I was going to grow up to be a classic, wear a white lab coat and carry a clipboard engineer and never speak up and never run a team. But it turned out I was a really terrible engineer. And I practically got fired. But I got sent to a manufacturing location to build up my technical skills. And then around people, I learned to thrive. And I started to realize I was actually a much more people person than I thought I was. But I grew up thinking I was going to be a single contributor
Hmm.
and no one would ever work for me and that I would never confront a soul. Um, so I think I told you early in my career, I was really unremarkable. And I was kind of hoping one day to be just sort of like an average manager who blended in. That was my aspiration. So going from almost being fired to blend in was my big achievement early in my career.
Yeah, it's like be in a way. the fact that you weren't a great engineer like made like actually worked out in your favor, right? Because it helped you be able to flex other muscles that you're like, wow, I'm actually pretty good at this.
I would agree. And so the one thing I love about our culture, well, like there was no way I was going to quit though. Like they're going to have to fire me, but I'm going to have to find a way to make this work. And I'm not going to just sit here and keep getting criticized or not fitting in. That's why I actually asked for a transfer, but I was just like, I'm not going to tell my mother that I quit. I'm going to find a way out of this. And I told myself driving 9 hours from Cincinnati to this place in Northeast Pennsylvania. I'm like, I'm just going to be someone else and I'm just going to pretend to have some sort of confidence.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm going to speak up, even though I'm going to feel embarrassed because I cannot continue to be criticized for being so like not effective. And I wanted to be effective. I wanted to fit in and I didn't know how to do it. So that part about like bearing down or being resourceful, I think is something that we do really well.
Hmm. Yeah, you kind of have to be, right? Yeah, like especially
Right.
like because immigrating to another country, you kind of have to be. And I'm curious, like, why do you think Asian parents don't emphasize a lot more of these managerial skills as much as, maybe science and math and, engineering and some of those skills tend to be more focused on? Do you think it's because of the stability of these positions?
I, I would guess so. My parents um, were very Asian, but in different ways. So my mom, she passed away when she was 95 and she was a physician. So like way, way back in the day, there were no women physicians, but in Japan, she became a physician. So she was born in the US, she immigrated or went back to Japan, went to high school, college, and medical school. And she was a practicing physician. So she always believed in education for women, and that was important, and that you should always get the highest level of education you should. So, but when she moved to the US, my dad's a minister, so they knew nothing about technical careers, but they had met this Polish couple whose sons were engineers who had become quote unquote something. One son became a doctor, one son became a businessman, and one son became a lawyer. So whatever this engineer thing was, must be good because you become something recognizable like a doctor or whatever. Um, but I think they really always encouraged us, everyone in my family, to like learn as much as possible. And you have a lot of talent, so you're supposed to fulfill your talent.
So do you think Asians have a leg up in the sense that it seems like we have a lot of work ethic, right? But I think to your point, like work ethic is only such a small portion piece of the puzzle that it's like almost like our krypton. It's like our kryptonite in some ways.
Yeah, so exactly, because my parents told me, hey, when you go to work, you have to be really humble, never talk about yourself, never raise your hand, wait to be asked, let your work speak for yourself because you have to be a super hard worker. And out of my peer group, I was the last person to get promoted.
Wow.
Uh, and there, and I was positive I wouldn't be last. I was positive people could see how hard I worked.
Hmm.
And eventually I found out that they knew I was a hard worker. They knew I was helping other people get great results, which made them think, yeah, you're a great, solid worker, but you're not a leader.
Hmm.
So how do they know how well you're going to make a decision or push back if they never hear you speak?
Right.
So they knew I was super helpful, but they didn't know if they put her in charge of like 30, 40, 60 people, would she be able to push back if they push back on her? Would she be able to answer a question with authority? Because they had never heard me speak up, but they knew I was smart because obviously I was helping all these other people get great results. So I
Hmm.
was recognized for being smart, but without leadership.
Right. So they just assume. So in the beginning, so what was your like aha moment that I mean, I'm sure there are multiple moments, but what was like the defining moment where you're like, all right, like something's got to change?
Um, Well, I'll tell you, it's not something about something's got to change, but the moment I realized I was not just like an average manager. So I was telling you before, I had a mentor. So I finally get promoted into, I worked in a plant about 650 people and they made me the safety manager. Like, it's like the bottom feeder job in a plant. It's where you tell people you're walking too fast, hold the handrail. You are widely despised.
Hmm.
Like, so I get promoted last out of my peer group in the worst job in the plant. And I went to the plant manager. I'm like, I do not want this job. This is the worst job in the plant. And the person before me was seriously the most despised person in the plant. And he's like, it's too bad. And I'm like, I do not want this job. And he's like, it's too bad. So he said, well, let's set your goals. At that point, the injury rate was 2.56 people per 100 were getting seriously injured, have to go to the doctor, get a stitch put in, breaking bones, things like that. So he said, how much do you want to reduce that rate? And I said, let's reduce it by over 30% to 1.5. So 2.4 to 6, like to 1.5. He's like, perfect. So your goal is 1.0. I'm like, no. I said 1.5. It's like more than a 30% reduction. It's a big deal. So he said, yeah, 1.0. And I'm like, really mad now because I don't want the job. And he's setting a goal that is over 50%. It's ridiculous. And I said, that you're just setting me up for failure. So he said, well, I'll mentor you. I'm like, I don't want your mentorship. I don't even want the job. So I went back to my desk and I thought about, here's what people are doing today, and here's where I want them to go. And here are 10 things I'm going to implement. I put the plan in my drawer. 1 year later, we hit a 1.0.
Wow.
And I went back to I went back to him. I mean, we've been meeting, but I just said, hey, let's look at the results. My God, I hit a 1.0. And he said, I actually didn't think you would ever hit a 1.0. I was like, what? And he said, well, I didn't know if you could get to 1.5 unless I gave you a stretch goal.
Hmm.
I would have been perfectly happy with 1.5, but I believe in stretch. But the moment I realized that at that point, I did not know that leadership was something that could be taught or done. And I didn't know that one person could move the needle for 650 people. Like no one worked for me. So I did it all through influence. And it was my first promoted job as a manager. And then I thought to myself, I think I'm really remarkable.
Hmm.
Like how many people could really move the needle that fast? And my plant manager was a high flyer. So he's like, I've actually never seen anybody change results so fast. And he said, I wanted you in this job because I thought you were remarkable. And I had thought, I'm like, oh no, I'm no one special. And then I thought, maybe I am someone special. And that was the first time I thought I was more than just average.
What I heard in that is that because you had clear goals, it also helped, right? Because I think a lot of us are like, oh, I want to get promoted one day. There's less like it's not specific enough.
Yeah, super clear goals. And then I did not know what mentorship meant. So I did not think highly of myself. Someone thought highly of me. I didn't know that that could help, but mentorship really changed how I grew my career. That's why I'm really big on mentorship. And when I meet people like you and I think, oh my God, I see something there, you want to pay it back and you want to grow it because I didn't think I had it in me. And someone believed in me more than I believed in myself. I had a brilliant career because of him. I'm positive of that because I would have never gotten started had I not gotten that result.
So when was it that moment when you hit the 1% where you realized like, oh wow, I'm capable of more, or was it even before that when you were, just under his mentorship?
No, I can clearly still remember sitting at my desk, opening my drawer, looking at that plan, and realizing I'd hit everything. And I thought, my God, this is really incredible. Like I think this is really remarkable. I was absolutely, positively shocked. And that's when I realized, wow, a single human being can really change people's lives. Like, I had an aha about leadership because I thought leaders were, I don't know, born or destined.
Hmm.
I didn't know it could be taught. And I didn't know that me, as someone I thought was completely average, could make a difference. We were the second largest employer in that plant. In the town of like 200,000 people. And so you're talking about teams and families, like it impacts a lot of people when people are healthy and
Hmm.
things like that. And it made a huge, huge difference. And I was just floored that just remember thinking, I actually helped all those people.
Hmm.
I was just amazed that a person could help people in that regard.
That's and and then do you think the one of the reasons why you initially didn't see it was because like there's less examples of Asian women in these types of roles? Like I think sometimes it's easier to have that vision when you see others like you, and then you can at least like ask them questions,
Oh,
right?
I would agree that mentorship or role models are really important. You can't be what you can't imagine yourself to be.
Yeah.
I had no Asian women. I only had one Asian woman boss my entire career, and I happened to be an Asian woman. She was my boss. So you have to find a mentor somewhere and a role model, and but you can't be what you can't see.
Right.
So it was really, yeah, I had to find other role models to help me envision. But I didn't really understand it until I had a mentor
Hmm.
and how important it was. And so I always try to be a mentor and always try to have a mentor.
Yeah. And what are your thoughts on seeking mentors outside of the company? Like, do you think that it's because I think what I hear from a lot of younger people is I'm afraid like how can I give back to my mentor? You know, I think sometimes people feel like they're not reciprocating or they feel like oh like I feel like I'm just taking.
Well, if someone wants to be a mentor and they're a good mentor, they're active, they get a lot from the relationship. They wouldn't, you can't, if you judge yourself as nobody and unless you can give back to them, then you're a terrible, I don't know, what's the word, mentee.
Yeah.
We enter these relationships because we get a lot from it, because watching someone grow in and of itself is a reward. Watching other people give back to other people expands influence. So I'm really passionate about helping Asian American leaders grow faster because they're going to help Asians everywhere.
Yeah.
So helping someone, if I want to help 50 people, it's one thing, but if 50 people help thousands more, that's more important. So I think to anyone who thinks I can't give back to my mentor, you shouldn't assume you know what drives the mentor.
Hmm.
You shouldn't assume that you're not giving back to them. You're
Right.
diminishing yourself.
Hmm.
It's very rewarding to watch someone like yourself do incredible things and thinking, wow, I wish I had that when I was younger, and hoping that you do better than I do. It's very, very rewarding to do that.
That's a great summary. That's a great reminder because I do think I mean this is like the number one question I get asked all the time because I do have a lot of younger this is their just right out of college that I'll talk to and they're like, "Oh, like what can I do to help you?" It's like, "Dude, you're helping me already." You know, but it's just it's hard for people to understand that sometimes, you know.
Yeah, and just like what you don't know is like you made an introduction for me now, right? And it could turn into something incredible. And you think, oh, it's nothing. I introduce people all the time.
Right.
But you introduced me to someone that I never would have had access to before. That's something, and you don't even realize it. You don't realize many times you don't, as the mentee, you don't realize how special you are.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean the other two people for the objection workshop that
Yeah.
we're thinking about doing, both of them too are probably more talented than I am, and they're way more ambitious. Like I think both of them, Ivana and Brandon, have like so much potential.
Yeah. Awesome.
And is one of my mentors. He's awesome. So I was like, yeah, like you would all definitely get along together, you know. So that
That's great. Yeah. That's fantastic. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I definitely want to talk about like how'd you come up with the name like Evoke? Like what made you choose that word? And what are your thoughts on like Asians being entrepreneurial? Because I do think that's not as common, or I think it's changed. I think in Silicon Valley and I think in California, there's a lot more Asian entrepreneurs. But other than tech, I feel like I don't really see as many.
Yeah. So evoke means to unlock hidden, untapped, or unfulfilled potential. So like there's invoking, provoking, evoking. And I feel that someone evoked in me, so someone untapped or unlocked my potential. So hidden, untapped, or unrealized potential is what evoke means. So I'm like, that's who I am. I want to evoke people's potential, and exceed, not just succeed, but exceed what they actually think is possible. Because that's honestly what mentoring did for me was I exceeded everything I thought I could do because one person believed in me more than I believed in myself. So that's why I picked the word evoke.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as an entrepreneur, I know like, because we're so cautious, we want everything buttoned up. I think it's really important to, um, like, you're like the 5 people you're around with the most. So you have to be around other entrepreneurs. I did not see myself as an entrepreneur until I saw my other friends being entrepreneurs. Only one was Asian, the rest were white. And then I started seeing, oh, if they can do it, I can see myself doing it. So this role modeling is really important.
Yeah.
And asking them, and then I usually, you can see I write a lot about mistakes that I make, because then people can see it's okay to make a mistake. Being an entrepreneur doesn't mean there are no risks or that you know everything. Being an entrepreneur means you can try, you know how to try or fail forward.
Hmm.
But I try to help people reduce some of the downside. I think getting coaching when you're an entrepreneur actually is really important to reduce some of the downside. You're not wandering so aimlessly.
I think there's something about Asians and like the face, like saving face, that has to do with why we tend to like not to show public failure. I think,
Yeah, probably.
and I think especially in Korean and Japanese culture as well, right? It
Oh
seems
yeah.
a very like it's the public persona is so important. So if you do have a mess up, like it does seem like it's whereas I think in America the stig it's like it's almost cool to fail now, right? But only in America. Like I feel like not everywhere is like that.
Well, right. America loves an underdog. Americans love rags to riches and overcoming failure. Yeah, I totally agree. That's really important. But a lot of just being an entrepreneur is like, well, if you come from a corporate job, you think you need to have everything perfect. So I have a friend who was just like, you're ready to go. It's completely imperfect. The time to launch is now, and call it proof of concept. Expect to fail and learn instead of trying to be 100% buttoned up. So when you work at P&G, that you launch something, it cannot fail. It's a publicly traded company. You put millions of dollars into it. He's like, you're a solopreneur. Like,
Hmm.
the only way to learn is to launch a proof of concept. Launch it really rough and then adjust along the way. That's probably the biggest thing that I learned, was it was okay to fail. And in fact, you want to find the pitfalls to keep perfecting it.
Yeah, because the stakes are so much higher, obviously, when it's like a multi-billion-dollar company, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
The failures could mean like millions and millions of dollars. So,
Right. And seen colossal things just fail. And so then you want to work even harder to make sure nothing fails. Whereas entrepreneurs are going to fail. You just want to, like I said, fail forward, or you want to have your biggest failures early when less is on the line. You haven't invested as much. So you're making these changes. So the time you really launch it and put your money into it, you know, you have a much more than a reasonable chance of winning.
hmm. That's good advice. Yeah, I think many of us don't think like it in the beginning you're almost allowed to make more mistakes because the stakes aren't as high, right? But once one day if you have 100 people that are working under you, then obviously like that's probably when you probably should be making less mistakes.
Yeah. So like a friend of mine, she's been taking this class on developing a lead magnet. I don't know how long she's been working on it. A long time. I've launched 3 courses since then.
Yeah.
3 courses, right? Which means 3 sales pages, like the courses, the selling of it, the taping of the course, the putting it on the website. 3 courses, and she hasn't done a single free lead magnet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, and I've had lead magnets with all the courses, right? And I was just like, you have to just put it out there, and if no one bites, you know you did it wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting because in a way, like the perfectionism gets you to a certain point, but then when you're an entrepreneur, you have to really let that go, or else like you're never gonna be able to finally launch.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, it totally. And I mean, I remember how you when I started a blog, I blog a lot and I put tons of stuff out there. And I was not a good blogger, but you could see what people were clicking on, and you could see what they gravitated towards or not gravitated towards. And I wouldn't have known that had I'd still be perfecting that first post from 2014 if I had, stick with my normal process. But I'm really glad I went out there and pushed send, because I found out I want to be this really inspirational blogger. It turns out I'm very instructional.
Hmm.
So I wanted to be the I have a dream kind of person. I'm not. I'm here's how you do it. And people are like, my God, it transformed my sales pipeline. I mean, I get really nice notes from people saying your blog changed everything because I tell you step by step what to do. I'm like, well, maybe I'm instructional.
Huh. That's a good takeaway. Well, I know it's coming up at the top of the hour. I really appreciate you, Rebecca. So many takeaways in just going for it, not and being able to impact others, like, like knowing that we have a ripple effect, like the more you mentor others, like the more, and really thinking like holistically, thinking long term, right? How the trajectory of that person's career will eventually impact so many thousands of people. And honestly, I mean, we've only had a few conversations, and I feel like I've been changed so much already. Like I see myself asking bolder questions, being a little bit more forward with some of my requests. Like, so thank you so much. I really
Super
appreciate.
welcome. I can't wait for the class for us to do, and whatever comes next. I'm like really excited about that. And thank you for having me on the podcast. I was really flattered.
Yeah, and I'll include the link to your website and your LinkedIn and everything. So if anyone wants to reach out and have a conversation, please do so. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks.